As the war between Ukraine and Russia rages on, a significant number of individuals on Ukrainian territory express their unwillingness to participate in the conflict and serve in the Russian army. The failure of anti-war sentiments among Russian soldiers and citizens can be attributed to the dire humanitarian conditions faced by those sent to the Ukrainian front lines. In contrast, Ukraine has launched a project called I Want to Live, offering hope and an opportunity to surrender for Russian soldiers. The project has gained significant traction, with thousands of Russian soldiers surrendering to the Ukrainian armed forces. These developments pose challenges to Russian leader Vladimir Putin's plans and have further eroded trust in the Moscow administration. Have you ever thought about how many people on the territory of Ukraine do not believe in this war and do not want to be in the Russian army? In fact, when we consider the war policies implemented by Russian leader Vladimir Putin in Ukraine, it's not difficult to estimate that the number of people who do not want to take part in this war has reached very serious levels. The most important factor in the failure of anti-war Russian soldiers and Russian citizens forcibly sent to the Ukrainian front lines to obey Putin's orders is Russia's inability to provide humanitarian conditions for its soldiers and citizens who join the volunteer army. For this reason, the Russians on the Ukrainian front lines do not want to face the restrictive problems such as infectious diseases, hunger, and thirst in Ukraine. The Ukrainian forces, on the other hand, have a very striking project that will go down in world history. The name of this project is I Want to Live. This incredible project, which offers a new hope of life for Russians, has become very popular among Russian soldiers and citizens, especially in recent days. Ukrainian officials reported that a website called I Want to Live, created for Russian soldiers who wanted to surrender, had attracted a total of more than 15 million visitors in the last 7 months. The I Want to Live hotline receives an average of 80 calls a day from people who don't want to die for the Russian regime in Russia or the occupied territory of Ukraine and want to surrender. In addition, according to the latest reports of Ukrainian officials involved in this surrender line project, approximately 3,200 Russian soldiers have surrendered to the Ukrainian armed forces since last month. Vitaly Matvienko, head of the Ukraine hotline, announced recently that more than 16,000 Russian applicants have surrendered to the Ukrainian armed forces through the project since the start of September. On the other hand, the Ukrainian official added that the number of Russian applications increased by 10% from March to April. These numbers are described as high enough to thwart leader Vladimir Putin's plans to invade Ukraine. Also, in a tweet recently, the Ukrainian Defense Ministry used the surrender project as a mockery against the Kremlin. In this tweet, the Ukrainian Defense Ministry emphasized that the closer the counterattack, the hotter the surrender season. The continuation of the tweet was as follows: "Don't wait for the heat. There are currently the most favorable conditions for surrender." These striking statements had the effect of an earthquake in Moscow. In addition, such approach just destroyed the trust of Russian citizens in the Moscow administration. Therefore, the number of Russian citizens who wanted to surrender was normally increasing day by day. Vitaly Matvienko, spokesperson for the I Want to Live hotline, stated that in the last 6 months they received a total of 12,000 questions from the Russians about surrender. In addition, Matvienko added that the calls to ask questions about surrender came mainly from Moscow and Leningrad regions, as well as Chelyabinsk, Novgorod, and occupied Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea. Matvienko noted that the I Want to Live team sometimes found themselves on the phone saying words of consolation to Russians who burst into tears. In fact, we know very well that after 20 years of propaganda in Russia, the people there have been completely brainwashed. But there is still a group of intelligent people who can think critically. Russian citizens fleeing from Russia's occupation policies by calling the surrender line called I Want to Live are the most concrete examples of this situation. Meanwhile, Ukraine developed new strategies and demonstrated remarkable ingenuity to persuade Russian soldiers to surrender. Konstantin Melnikov, a war correspondent who is often on the front lines, explained that the Ukrainian military designs its own unique advertising campaigns. In this campaign, Melnikov noted Ukrainian troops printed special leaflets, loading them into shells and fired them into the Russian-occupied territory with a Grad rocket launcher. The leaflets state in Russian that the Russians should surrender voluntarily, and they give accurate statistics of the Ukrainian General Staff on Russian casualties. In addition, the brochures prepared within the scope of the campaign include the phone numbers that those who want to surrender can call. The most striking detail in the brochures was a price list showing how much money Russian soldiers can earn if they surrendered with their equipment. According to the price list prepared by the Ukrainians, Russian soldiers who deliver a tank can receive a total payment of $10,000. Also, alongside these campaigns in the expansion of the I Want to Live project, in December, a training video was released explaining to prospective Russian POWs how to surrender not only directly to the Ukrainian authorities, but also to a drone. Analysts predict that more and more Russians will surrender, noting that Ukraine, unlike Russia, complies with the Geneva Conventions as well as such campaigns and practices when it comes to respecting the rights of prisoners of war. Ukrainian Ombudsman Dmytro Loibnitz confirmed that a monitoring mission carried out on March 28 is one of the camps where Russian prisoners are held has met international standards for the treatment of prisoners. Loibnitz and his team carried out this critical task. Loibnitz found on his Telegram channel that Russian prisoners of war are being held in accordance with the requirements of the Geneva Convention on the Treatment of Prisoners of War. According to the observations of Loibnitz and his team, the temperature conditions and daily routine at the facilities met all the requirements of the contract. In addition, surrendering Russian soldiers have the right to communicate and work with their relatives in turn through periodic telephone calls. According to the requirements of the Geneva Convention, the surrendered here are fed a military menu. In addition, human rights and social activist Tatiana Ivanova emphasized that when the Russians were taken prisoner in the caravanserai, they saw that the conditions of captivity were not humiliating. Considering all of this, Ukraine was proving to the whole world how conscientious and humane it approached the prisoners of war. The surrendered Russians are, of course, in detention. Of course, they are in detention centers. But according to the agreement implemented by the Ukrainians, these people are kept separate from the criminals. They were not kept in the same cells as the criminals. These people say that they are ready to work on the construction sites here and repair what they have destroyed. In short, Russian soldiers and citizens who surrendered to the Ukrainian armed forces never want to return to Russia. They don't want to go back because they know what awaits them at home. So how did I Want to Live, presented by Ukraine, which is a completely new hope of life for Russians, begin? The project was created to provide Russian and Belarusian military personnel to escape the war in Ukraine. I Want to Live. Spokesman Vitaly Matvienko stated that they officially launched the surrender line on September 18, 2022, a few days before Russian President Vladimir Putin announced the start of the mobilization. The hotline, which was initially supervised by the National Police of Ukraine, was later transferred to Kazabov. The surrender line I Want to Live, which has become almost corporate, is now operated around the clock by operators who answer calls and process messages from various messaging applications. Matvienko noted that in addition to investigations from active soldiers, the initiative has received numerous calls from Russian civilians who fear that they will be enlisted soon. The increase in surrender numbers was mainly due to fears of a counterattack expected this spring from Ukraine. In fact, the vast majority of Russians do not want to fight. They want to save their own lives by surrendering. This is a good alternative because the days ahead are not looking good for Russia. The approach of the Moscow administration towards its capitulating citizens is much more hopeless than the possible future situation of Russia. In a preemptive move to intimidate asylum seekers, Russia's Supreme Court ruled last week that Russian soldiers could be sentenced to up to 10 years in prison for voluntarily surrendering. Here is a short and clear summary of the value Russia attaches to its citizens and soldiers. This is the most visible proof that free will no longer exist in Russia. But freedom is such an important phenomenon that the Russians, who want to live free despite the threats of the Putin regime and surrender to Kiev, respect the freedom of the Ukrainians in the same way. Thank you for watching.